best thing the United States can do? Obviously something with Saudi Arabia. What do you think in Saudi Arabia? What do you think in Iraq and with Iran?
Okay.
That's a simple question.
Yes. If I am elected in Saudi Arabia in the first place, we should have initiated, and need to initiate today, a full-scale, all-out effort, a Manhattan Project, to find alternative energy sources. We need to challenge the environmentalists over the Alaskan oil reserves. We need to understand this as matters of national security and national survival. We need to bring pressure to bear on the Saudis because, after all, it is not the seller only who has holds all the cards. The buyer can put a lot more pressure than we've been doing on them in regard to their activities around the world and in the United States. As far as Iraq goes, I think, as I said before, that the Wilsonian democracy project is doomed. It was doomed from the beginning. We should, if not withdraw entirely, then at least redeploy our troops into defensive mode so as to defend ourselves and the surrounding countries against jihadist elements from Iraq. But as far as what they do with their own country, that's an internal matter, and that's up to them. If there's civil war in Iraq, I'm sorry, but it's not our responsibility as Americans to make sure there are no civil wars anywhere. And Iraq is a fictional polity to start with that was cobbled together out of 3 Ottoman provinces by the British. It doesn't have any essential unity. Why is it so necessary to keep it together? Why do we have to spend American lives to keep it together? I'm not saying it was wrong to topple Saddam Hussein, but that's a different question from whether a democracy in Iraq is even possible to be established. As far as Iran goes, if they don't have nuclear weapons already, they're going to have them very soon. President Ahmadinejad has been very clear. He repeated his genocidal intentions against Israel just the other day, said Israel will soon cease to exist. If Israel is our ally, and if we have any sense of our own self-interest in the larger sense against the global jihad, which Iran is trying to position itself now as the leader of, and is working with al-Qaeda together to become that leader, if we have any sense of any of these things, then we have to strike the nuclear program before it's too late. I don't think there's any way around that.
Hello, my name is Wes Saeed, full life. I had a question, because there was a recent conference in Boston at the Ayn Rand Institute held, and there was a packed panel. And the discussion was characterizing the same type of methods used in Islam, and what you were discussing in terms of forming these totalitarian regimes based on interpretation of the Quran, etc. And some of the solutions that were brought up from Yaron Brook and John Lewis were to use the same methods that the United States used against Japan, yes. Giving the example of Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
No. John Lewis, actually, he adduced a document that was written by General MacArthur, as I recall. I could be wrong about that, but in any case, it was an official document of the American occupying authorities in Japan during the time of the occupation. And it said that Shinto as an individual religious faith must not be interfered with. However, Shinto as a political ideology has to be actively resisted, and it must have no place in the government or in the schools. And Lewis, I think, expatiated on that very, very eloquently, and I entirely agree that political Islam ought to be confronted in exactly the same way. Islam as an individual religious faith must not be interfered with, but should have no presence in Iraq or elsewhere in the government or the schools, and then only by such means can the equality of rights of religious minorities and of women be protected. But as far as Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuking somebody, nobody's talking about that.
Thank you so much for addressing this most important, yet most taboo issue that the world is facing today, and that our politicians, our intellectuals, our media basically make sure that they slide under the rug.
Yes, they do.
I came from France, and I'm afraid my country is on the verge of collapse, the way I see it, for the simple reason of the synergy between socialism, which has destroyed the economy, and, of course, the political movement of Islam, whereby the demographic bomb has basically suffocated the ability of the traditional French to fight back while appeasing this growing problem. And I think this issue needs to be addressed, the fact that basically it grows very fast and suffocates economically and therefore exacerbates the tensions.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. The policies that have been adopted in Western Europe for the last 30 years are suicidal, ultimately. They entered into a series of agreements with the Arab League, the European Commission, and then the European Union that were a result of the oil crisis, rather, of 1973. The Europeans were frightened by the oil crisis of 1973 and wanted to ensure a steady supply of oil. In order to do so, these agreements that they entered into with the Arab League, which are all laid out in great detail in Batya Or's great book, Eurabia, which I highly recommend to all of you, you will find in those agreements that they guaranteed large-scale immigration from Muslim societies, but absolutely forswore any attempt to assimilate those new immigrants. Now, it's ironic now that the French have been criticized for not assimilating their Muslim immigrants when they told the Arab League they wouldn't, at the insistence of the Arab League. The Arab League wanted to form Islamic enclaves in France and elsewhere, and they have succeeded in doing so. It is not the fault of the, well, it is the fault of the European governments, but not because of some kind of discrimination or racism or neglect. It is because of explicit agreements that they have entered into, that they are honoring. Now, the demographic trends are very bad. As you say, there will be, unless things change drastically, Islamic majorities in several countries in Western Europe before the end of this century. And then we're going to see, since nobody is even daring to ask questions about the allegiance of these Muslims in these countries to Islamic law and their intentions to impose it over their new countries, nobody's even asking the questions. Thus, they are able to work unabated. And as you say, all there has been is appeasement in response. To a degree that's really, the degree of denial in this never ceases to amaze me. I was speaking at a conference a few months ago, and there were a number of officials there, American and European officials, and one by one they got up and they said, well, the first thing we want to make sure that everybody knows is that Islam has nothing to do with this problem. And we know that this is not a problem with the religion of Islam. The overwhelming majority of Muslims in our countries are completely on our side, completely loyal citizens, and we're very happy to have them here. And then in practically the next breath, they said, the only thing is, we can't find imams to work with. Every time we find an imam that we think is moderate, he turns out to be a jihadist. And it never seemed to occur to them that if there was these overwhelming majority of loyal, peaceful Muslims, then how is it that they didn't seem to have any leaders? But the contradiction was not apparent. And I think that this is just emblematic of the denial and the wishful thinking that unfortunately is passing for policy in Europe and America today.
Larry Kelly, San Francisco. I'm a contributor to Human Events also. Do you see also that if you look historically from the time that the Muslim armies rode out of Arabia and have been attacking the infidel, both the West and Persia, that what we're seeing also is really just a continuation of the war that Islam has waged on the West? That's question A. And question B, what are your recommendations for Islamic immigration into the United States going forward?
Yes, thank you. A couple things. Of course this is a continuation. You know, there's so many things about this issue that, as the shadow would say, have the power to cloud men's minds. And one of them is the fact that if you go back 50 years, 75 years, you didn't see this kind of jihad activity against the West. And people think, therefore, that because we're only seeing it really since the Khomeini revolution in Iran, that it is something newly minted. And they then jump to the assumption that, therefore, it is a new heretical movement within the Islamic world that contradicts the true teachings of Islam and can, therefore, be relatively